Hey everyone, Temporal here, and for this session, we are talking about the format changes for the newly announced Collegiate Overwatch season. We're heading into the spring season, just went up today. You can see it here, and it's going to go ahead and say what our cash prize is, but we've got some interesting things to talk about for it first. So what I've got here is a clip from Jake over at Blizzard that's telling us some of the main changes that were made there. And Blizzard did something cool. They had sort of a user feedback group of sorts. They brought in coaches, players, things like that to talk about things that they wish had been done differently in the previous season. So good on them for taking some feedback. They of course didn't do everything because, things do cost money, things do take more effort, but here are some of the changes that they made. First is no more Friday matches. Most matches will take place on Saturday with at least 2 matches assigned per day. This isn't my favorite. I understand the desire to get rid of Friday matches. That was especially a complaint for Western schools where, hey, it's starting pretty early match time because they had all of the groups together last season, West, East, Central, Hawaii, Alaska, you name it. Everyone was playing at the same time, so they sort of had to compromise with what time the matches were out, and some of them were just barely getting out of school or not even out of school, or like the match starts right as they're out of their last class. So I get why they wanted to get rid of those Friday matches. But Sunday has some similar issues, so they went, hey, we're going to do 2 matches per day. The advantage to 2 matches per day is that players get to go, hey, we'll warm up, we'll play 1 match, then we'll play another match. When you're playing on 2 different days and you're a serious team, you're investing quite a bit into it. You might be only playing for 45 minutes. It's generally a first to 2, best of 3 for those Swiss matches, for example. But in those later rounds, you can't afford to drop them, and you might have had, you did do some level of warm-up before that. So you might be going, oh, let's organize a warm-up, let's do a warm-up, let's do this. And then especially if you get a forfeit or a no-show from the other team, which sometimes happens in the earlier rounds, you feel like, wait, we spent all this time doing a warm-up, that sort of thing. So I do see it. It does save total amount of time. You have to do less warm-ups by having your matches back-to-back like that. It also gives the players more ability to compete in other tournaments or to go have some free time back to their life, which is helpful in that, hey, you have a single day that you can condense down your matches to, at least for this in the Swiss bracket. So that's a nice change. I have to admit, I was hoping that our West versus East separation here, which we're about to get to, was instead going to allow us to seed between every single match. And if we're doing 2 matches in the same day, I doubt that's going to happen. I was hoping that us going into the East versus West stage, or East versus West groups, which is something I recommended, and I'm glad that they took that under advisement and actually went ahead and did it, different groups for the Swiss stage and then mixed them together for groups. I'm glad that that happened, but my personal hope was that that would be what allowed us to go, hey, you guys have less flexibility to reschedule because we're putting this at times that make sense for East or times that make sense for West, and this is what you signed up for. So that makes sense, and you're going to now play at the assigned time. We're going to do less from a reschedule standpoint. I had hoped that that would be the case because it would have allowed us to make our Swiss bracket be an actual Swiss bracket. What has happened in previous seasons, and what I expect we're looking at this season, is you go into week 1, you get assigned 2 matches against 2 opponents that are 0-0. So against your first match, you're both 0-0. And then in your second match, you're up against someone who might be 1-0, might be 0-1. Okay, that's not great because the difference between these two is pretty big as the tournament goes on. Let's say then you go into week 2. So week 2, this was week 1, week 2, and your first opponent, your third match, is up against someone who is 2-0 because you won your first matches. That's helpful, that maybe you won one like this, or you won against someone who was 0-0, then you won against someone who was 0-1, so this doesn't really help you very much. Then you go up against someone who's 2-0 in your third round, and because it was seeded at the 4th time, even though you're 3-0, you might go up against someone who is 2-1. And this really isn't great as the seeding goes on and as you get into tiebreakers and things like that. You can also go, hey, you get up to like 6-0, for example, And then you, in the final week, because there's going to be 4 weeks now, go over to 6-2. When if you'd lost one match strategically earlier, you might have been able to have softer opponents the way through and actually finish up 7-1, which might have been a stronger finish. Things like that. So I was really hoping we would fix our broken seeding with this division, but that's not what happened. And you guys aren't here for my belly aching. You guys are here to see about what the actual rule changes are. So, here's a nice one. Assault maps are no longer included in the map pool. Does that mean we might be seeing an Overwatch 2 type thing drop while we're in the middle of our collegiate tournament? No, it does not. But we can dream. That said, I'm happy to see it gone. 2CP being gone, 2CP being something that got practiced very rarely because it only even maybe came up in tiebreakers, playoff, those sorts of situations. It didn't make sense to devote a ton of practice time to it. It being out of the pool, it being something that a lot of teams don't want to scrim anyways. Hey, I'm happy with it. I'm perfectly happy to not play Hanamura or Anubis again. Volskaya, I shall miss you. Okay. Next, we move on to this, which is the big news. Swiss stage will be split into East and West divisions. The top 32 teams from each region will advance to group stage. That is a lot. That is 64 teams making it through to group stage. Now, there's some problems with this. I'm personally okay with this trade-off. I would have been better with this trade-off if it was to get us better true seeding or true Swiss play. But this does mean that 64 teams won't make it into the playoffs, but will make it into groups. And I can tell you now that you could probably come up with about 40 or so GM, maybe, above 4.0, like 4.1 plus, or at least GM teams in the Eastern Division. There are not 32 GM, as in 4K plus SR average, teams in the West in Collegiate. That's not a thing. So this is going to be a bit lopsided. That's potentially okay as long as people go, hey, this isn't the top 64 teams, because your top 64 teams would skew harder to the East than that. It then gets a little bit more complicated in terms of, hey, is like an Irvine, a Boise, and a Santa Cruz. Those are schools that you might expect to walk out with 8-0, 7-1 type records. Are those as good as a Maryville, a Northwood, a Bay State, who are also going to walk out with similar records? No, they're really not as good as those. We definitely have more of our top players in the East than in the West. We have some good schools in the West. The schools that I named are very good Overwatch schools. Seeing them in the top 16, top 32, very reasonable, very regular. But if we look at like the top 5, the top 6, the top 8 schools, you would look at those and go, hey, 7 of 8 are going to be in the West, or in the East, or 13 of 16 are going to be in the East, that sort of thing. So that's fine, not a big deal. Just means we won't get a great look. We won't get a good look at what are the top 64 schools or what are the top 32 schools. We're instead only really going to get a good look at what are the top 16 schools. Ultimately, that's how Blizzard has designed their tournament. It's a little less fun for the fans, though, because we want more accurate delineations of, hey, who's how good, which school is better than which, who, are you the 24th best school? Are you top 24? Are you top 36? Are you top... That sort of thing is more interesting to fans. So a little boring to see that, but we'll deal. Group stage will be round robin, with the top 64 teams from Swiss being split into 8 groups of 8. Top 2 teams of each group will advance to the playoff. This is much better. We had this weird thing last season where we broke up into groups of 4, and instead of round robining in our groups of 4, we did brackets, which frequently was very similar to round robining, but wasn't quite the same. It was a bracket, and it was a double elimination bracket for each group of 4, which was incredibly weird. This is just better to have this, hey, in groups, you're just going to do a straight round robin, and groups of 8 as opposed to groups of 4. That makes more sense too. I definitely prefer that. So, hey, good change here. I like it. And then this is one of my favorites as well. Playoff stage will be 16-team double elimination bracket. Thank goodness. I know it can, eliminate some of the hype around the grand finals if there's a bracket reset, and I don't actually know if we will have a bracket reset, even if they don't have a bracket reset, even if they instead say too bad, or instead say, hey, you get a 1 point map lead, or whatever the case may be, or you get map pick lead, whatever the case may be. Regardless, having most of the playoffs be double elimination there, that'll at least allow us within our top 16 to do a little more, hey, who's how good, we can see a little bit more rather than just, okay, this is the top school, these are the top 4, but are they really, Oh, SCAD got eliminated by ISU in the first round. Does that mean SCAD is a top 16 school, or are they a top 8 school? That sort of thing. So happy to see this. Those second chances are nice in these sort of tournaments here. So those are sort of like the cliff notes of it. If we actually take a quick look at the rules, the only things here that have really been missed that are important are going to be, let's take a quick look. We're looking at 8 rounds rather than 10. We've had 10 in the past, but if you're splitting East and West, makes sense. You can do 8 there. I suspect West will get to grind quite a bit because I suspect West will have less schools registered, but we will see there. There's still going to be... Still no reseeding between matches, and the reason I can tell that is because if you look at the play times, it's at 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., and I think it is very unlikely that it'll be turn in your match results and will tell you who your next opponent is after you turn that in. I could be wrong, but I'm making the call that it looks like if it's one match and then right after that match, the second one, I'm making the call. There's not even like an hour and a half there. It's just the straight hour. Usually best of twos don't take, or best of threes, first to twos don't take that full hour. But even so, I don't think there's enough time for this to be an expectation that they are reseeding each round, which is kind of my highest item wish list remaining for Collegiate here, for the Activision Blizzard tournament. And then we said no 2CP in the pool, which is great, but we do see that we have a full map pool beyond that. They're letting us play everything. So it didn't become, oh, you only have to practice 6 maps. In previous seasons, we've had like 3 maps per type. No, now we're looking at this and it's the full map pool except no 2CP, which works just fine for me. Content grind temp, good stuff. Thank you, EMF. I appreciate it. Okay. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the meaningful rule changes. I think those overall some nice rule changes, even if I would have preferred that reseeding a lot to having that second day, but I'm a coach, not a player, and I get this is a little nicer for the players and that they get that day back. But now I want to go into the discussion of how strong is East versus West. And when we get into that, really the best way to do this is to look at some of these schools and let's look at who the top... If we take a quick look here, the top 32 schools were, and we have this here, top 32 schools this last season, and we're going to divide these up between East and West so that people can see what we're talking about. And the easiest thing to do here is to pull out our West schools. And if we pull out our West schools, UCLA, top 32 school last season, they're West. CU Boulder, Colorado, sure, West. UC Santa Cruz, looking good. Okay, we only look here. This is a elimination. This is a lower bracket. These aren't fresh schools. So 3 out of 4 West looks pretty good. Any West over here? No West over here. Any West over here? No. There's no West over here. UT Dallas Comets, those are based on our new time zones because they've told us how the split works. I should have made that clear. Everything in Central and Eastern is in the East Division. Everything in Pacific, Mountain, Alaska, and Hawaii is in the West Division. So we look at that, we have what we have here. Let me just see real quick there. Yep, none of these are going to go ahead and make it into our West. We go over here, and UCI, that's a West school. They made it into the top 4. They even took down UT Dallas to do it, which was definitely an upset. So, hey, good on them. Very good West school. Toronto, that's East. Converse, that's going to be East as well. That's in South Carolina. Bellevue is Nebraska. That's East. Okay, we're struggling here. Northwood, no. Florida, no, that's definitely an East. Waldorf? Well, Waldorf is really imploded a bit, but that's Iowa East. Redhawks, that's Miami, Ohio. So again, we're looking at East here. Boise, good, strong Overwatch school. That's West. We're good with it. UW Scout, that's Wisconsin. That's going to be East. Carnegie Mellon, that's going to again be Pennsylvania East. You could choose not to count these two as East because the belief is that they cheesed the bracket a little bit, that they're not actually top 32 schools, that they intentionally threw an early round match or two to get easy matches on the way through when it worked out for them to get to groups. Didn't work out to them to get them to playoffs. As you can see, they were pretty easily handled. So nothing too wild there. We go through here, UW, that's University of Washington, that is West. Penn State, Ohio, those are both East. Utah, good, strong school, West there. SCAD, that's Georgia, that's East. Highlander Gaming, let me check my notes. Highlander Gaming is UC Riverside. Okay, cool. That's going to be West, that's UC, California system. And then we have Lords, which is going to be another Ohio school, which is East. So, little hard to tell from this, but we can say, that's not a ton of blue marks, but maybe we put in some red marks just to balance this out so that we can see what we're looking at. Okay, well, this first group, our strong West group here, does have an East school in it, the Redbirds. Yeah, that would be ISU, Illinois State. Then over here, Northeastern, UNT, Mizzou, Bay State, those are all East. University of Texas, Dallas, Illinois Orange, yep, it's Illinois. Winthrop is going to be... Winthrop is going to be in South Carolina, East. Waterloo Warriors, those are going to be... Oh, I know, I had this one here. Where were those guys? Waterloo? I swear I had that in my notes. You're going to have to believe me. They're East. I'm blanking on them in my notes, but they are East. Okay. Then we're looking at University of Toronto, East. Converse Valkyries, we know that those are South Carolina, sure. Bellevue puts us in Nebraska. Northwood, Florida, of course, East. Waldorf, we talked about, that's East. Miami, Ohio, Redhawks, that's East. Wisconsin, we talked about this. We know Maryville's East. Harrisburg, yep, that's East, 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 East. So that's quite a bit more red than we had blue on here. So definitely as we look at this, we can see there is a bit of an imbalance. There's definitely quite a bit more. As we look at this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 of our top 32 were West, which means, 3/4 of our top 32 schools were East. So West is, based on this last season, going to have an easier path through noticeably. That said, in group stages, maybe it all works out. I would propose that it does, but let's take a look, because we can and because we've got this nice visual for it, at the previous season. This was put together for not just the last season, but the previous year. So we just went through the fall season. This would have been the spring season before that, and now we're heading into a new spring season. And let's do the same thing. We've got a West school over here in UW. Yeah, they're good. Makes sense. Idaho. Okay, sure. We've got this over here. That would be Utah. Sure. Boise, Idaho. Utah. Absolutely. Good. And then we've got in the middle there, we've got that one. We've got UC Riverside. We've got UCLA. That was Fresno up there, by the way. UC Irvine, CSU Long Beach, and then UC San Diego. Okay. Decent. And then, hey, Colorado. Great. We've got some decent number of blue ones up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, wait, that's 10. And this was a top 32 again. So we go over here and we can see, wait a second, if I do red marks for every school that's here, and I'm going to go through this quickly, we can see that, wait a second, this is, again, going to be quite a bit more East than West. So, yeah, I don't think there's really any way to deny that the Eastern Division is going to be tougher than the Western Division, but as long as we don't think of it as, hey, these are the top 64, and we understand it's top 32 from each region, and it's not really real until we cut down to the top 16, I think it'll work out. And the reason that I expect that that'll work out is, hey, the seeding should still work going into those, that we should be able to see that the middle of the table, not the very bottom, but the middle of the table Eastern teams that get paired up in their situations with the, some of the middle of the table Western teams there are going to take them out. Because when you get to the bottom of the Western teams, you are going to, if you're going 32 deep, get some teams of low masters, some teams of diamonds there that you would expect some of these Eastern teams, not even the ones who made this necessarily, but even some of the lower level Eastern teams to beat there. All of the schools that show up here, perfect. Oh, let me do that again. All of the schools that show up here, perfectly reasonable schools, of course. Not a big deal here. And then we could do much the same thing where we could go, hey, let's look over and see what is different from this season, and go, hey, there's a couple that made it through in the West that are a little bit different. No, there's really not. No, UCLA made it through this. No, UCLA, I want to say made it through last time as well. No, actually, they did last time as well. Yeah. So there's not a ton that we're looking at there that's different. We actually had a couple less West make it this time than last time. But overall, I think this mostly works okay. You look at it, you assume that we're going to end up in a situation where you have, hey, seed 1 maybe from West Division versus seed 32 from East Division. Of course, seed 1 will win that, and then you obviously end up in a situation where you have seed 1 versus seed 32, and these would be in the same group. These wouldn't necessarily be the first match, though they could in groups. These will eventually work their way out, where you have things like, hey, eventually you get to a place where you have seed 16 in West versus seed 17 in East, and seed 17 in East will pretty cleanly win that. Does it mean that, East is going to have a little bit harder time than West? Yeah, ultimately it will. But seed 17 in East, I expect, will pretty handily beat seed 17 in West, especially because West should be pretty darn accurately divided just based on a smaller number of schools in their 8-season bracket. So that's really what I wanted to cover here. If people have questions, concerns, go, oh my goodness, it's terrible, this is the worst news ever, absolutely do let me know. Kashir is asking, can I review his 4200 Red Hawk? Sure, send me the code. I'm happy to review that. I'm probably not going to do it tonight, but I'm happy to do a review for that of you tomorrow. That's not a problem at all. Yeah. We drifted down a little bit there. There we go. So yeah, that's what we've got here. That is the news. That tells us that, yeah, West might be a little easy mode to get into groups, but ultimately, that's not going to get you into playoffs. And if you look at this from a playoff perspective, playoffs should very much have their integrity. It's, again, a shame that it's top 16, but the fact that it's double elimination is in and of itself a huge upgrade, so I'm happy to see these changes. Let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments below. Do you love these changes? Hate these changes? Am I vastly underselling the Western region? Am I looking at them and you're going, hey, no, there's some great West teams that have been just outside the cutoff and you're not paying attention to them, but they easily could have upset some of these teams that, maybe made it into top 32 but didn't do extremely well, like maybe the UNTs or the Floridas or the Waldorfs or something like that. Like, hey, they were as good as them, but they didn't make it in. They got cut off at that 7-3, but they're almost good enough. I don't think so. I think if we look through the Western teams, we can pretty much see it's basically what we see on this map, plus maybe Hawaii. Yeah. But hey, you guys let me know what you think. I guess I've just thrown some shade at West, but I live in California, so I can do that. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.